Dr. Leanne Domash, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Well, it's great to have you, and we're going to be discussing your book, Imagination, Creativity, and Spirituality in Psychotherapy. Welcome to Wonderland. It's a great title. First, I want to congratulate you on writing such a fine book. It has special appeal to me because of my longstanding interest in dreams, which we share, and also
Yeah.
my own interest in the creative unconscious. And
Mm.
and so your book really hits home for me, and I'm sure it will for many of my listeners and viewers. Um, so, by the way, if uh, I know you've got examples from your own life as well as stories from taken from your experience as a psychoanalyst, and you have some of those in the book. So feel free to sprinkle those in at
Hmm.
any point where it makes sense to you. And the subtitle of your book is Welcome to Wonderland. And maybe that's a good place for us to start. What's behind that subtitle? Welcome to Wonderland.
Well, it's really the wonderland of the unconscious and something that has always fascinated me. And as I write in the book, I was very intrigued by Alice in Wonderland, which that book was very much in contrast to what I felt I was learning in school and in Hebrew school, which was in a way more linear, more factual. And
Sure.
I just got very intrigued, and I literally kept reading it over and over again, almost like a mantra.
Yeah.
And
That,
I felt that I got to know Alice, and I went along with her on her journey, and I on all the characters she met. I just thought were so astounding, and it really helped me. It helped temper my overly literal. I mean, this is when I'm 7, 8, 9. My overly literal interpretation of the world. Um, my
you
parent.
mentioned, yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned going to Jewish school, and in
Hmm.
fact, you in the book you share that you grew up in an Orthodox family,
Hmm.
and I could imagine that that might be a bit constraining. Uh,
It was interesting because it was constraining, but not really because of my parents. It was me who listened in Hebrew school very literally to the rabbi and all the 600 and I believe 13 rules, or is it 14? I'm not sure. But anyway, you have to listen to all the rules, and you have to, and this somehow trapped me. My
mhm.
father, on the other hand, was always telling me, don't take it so seriously. And
Interesting.
and he was trying to calm me down, but I didn't listen to him. And I thought I'd listen to the rabbi. And unfortunately, that's, I think, what turns a lot of people off to religion is that they are introduced to it as a child when they're very literal, and they never
Hmm.
really develop a mature understanding of what is meant
That's an
by some
interesting
of the things.
observation. Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's an interesting observation that
Because,
it's introduced when we're still at that literal stage, and
yeah,
it gets by no accident, they're hoping to plant it very deeply into our being.
yeah, they do. And, I think it's a problem because
Yeah,
a lot of us never get rid of that guilt,
yeah,
that's instilled. And, but I think if as you get older, of course, which you don't know when you're 8, and also it was not always open to women either when I was a child, but the study of the Talmud and the Torah is is on many levels, the interpretations. It starts with the literal, which is what we know as an 8-year-old, but it
okay,
goes much deeper,
yeah, yeah,
and it goes down to the way the Kabbalah might interpret, which is very metaphorical and very much a play on words and very interpretive.
okay. We're
So,
going to come back to the Kabbalah in a
mhm.
little bit. Um, so, how were you able to break out of this relatively black and white world into a more colorful world?
Well, I credit Alice to start with, because she really introduced me to dreams. But I was very, I don't know, I just seemed to follow this path. Like I, when I was like 13, 14, my mother got the Ladies' Home Journal delivered. And Bruno Bettelheim, the psychoanalyst, had a column, and I used to read it.
Wow.
And I said, "Oh, this is interesting." And then I taught Hebrew school when I was 16. And this is after going to Hebrew school for years and years and years, and not being able to have a bat mitzvah, because girls weren't given bat mitzvah. But nevertheless, I continued to study
Yeah.
like a crazy person. Anyway, I taught Hebrew school. There was a girl in my class who seemed very disturbed, and she kept running out of the room, and she was crying all the time. And I, on my own, just called the mother and started counseling her, and the girl improved. So this was like opening up my ideas to things different than,
Yeah.
what was going on.
You're right. It sounds like you sort of had a call, and
I did.
as you moved into being a therapist at 7 or 8, or maybe it was older at that point.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I felt that. And I also, in college, I didn't study psychology, but on my breaks, I would read Freud's case histories just for fun.
For fun, yeah.
Yeah,
And you
because I
mentioned
thought that.
Bruno Bettelheim, who
Mhm.
is known for his work on fairy tales,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so that also may have been a bit of an entry.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so you write about spirituality and the imagination, and what's the relationship between the two, between spirituality and imagination?
Well, some people think they're synonymous, that the
Uh-huh.
two are synonymous. Like James Hillman, the famous Jungian psychologist,
Right.
he feels that they're the same, and that they're a perspective on life. But I also think that you must use your imagination to some extent to enter the spiritual world. It isn't a logical world. It is a world where you have to lessen your boundaries between yourself and nature, between yourself and the other person, to let more of the unconscious come in.
Yeah.
So you're more open, and you feel connected to the whole.
Yeah. And one of the things you write is that psychotherapy is a sacred act. And I
Mhm.
thought that's an interesting assertion.
Yeah, I do feel that. I feel we have a calling. We're entrusted with the souls and the bodies of our patients, really, because they're connected. Uh, we must listen very deeply. We have to listen in a sacred way. We're always listening to the meaning, beneath
Mhm.
the words.
Yeah.
It's like an I thou relationship that Martin Buber talks about.
Hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned the Kabbalah earlier, and without going into too much detail, because I know that's a huge that's a huge
Huge.
topic area.
Yeah.
But what is it about the Kabbalah that nurtures your thinking and approach?
Oh, I don't know where to begin. It's so vast. Um, I like that it started out in order to it's about transformation,
Hmm.
and that's what I'm interested in too. Uh, and that's what psychoanalysis is about. So it started out to transform Judaism because it had become too intellectual and too rigid, really. So it's an opening up, but it's also an attempt to transform the individual.
Yeah.
Because as the individual studies the Kabbalah, he too is transformed.
It's
And
interesting that I think each of the major religions has a mystical component, sort of
yeah,
a breakout group. Uh,
right.
that wants to be more in touch with the source, if you will.
Yes. And there are some psychoanalysts who are very much in line with this, like Wilfred Bion. His thinking is very much in line with the Kabbalah. He says,
How so? Because I've heard his name in a lot of interviews, but I've never
Mhm.
read any of his work.
Well, he's very much about kind of, before it was popular, he talked about the unconscious communication between patient and therapist, or you could say between man and God. When I say man, I mean woman too, but
Sure.
I just for the purposes of our talking.
Yeah.
Um, and Beyond's idea is he has two, he has so many ideas, but anyway, two ideas are that the analyst is in search of O, the letter O. And by O, he means many things, but he means almost a Godhead, almost an absolute truth, something that is everything and nothing. And to find O, you have to empty yourself at the beginning of the session like a mystic does.
Mm.
And you cannot remember anything about the patient. You just want to be with the patient. And the Kabbalah also is a search for the truth. And it also, if we have time, emphasizes the void, the importance of the void. And this is one of my favorite concepts in Kabbalah, because God, according to that myth, they have their own myth about the creation of the world, that God contracted to create a void to create man. And the word for void in Hebrew is ayin, and that means nothing or darkness. But ayin also means everything, because it's pure potential. And out of this void comes something. And Beyond wants you to be in the void in the beginning of the session, so something can happen.
Yeah. So something can happen. I was wondering if awe would be a good translation of O. Is the analyst maybe seeking to get into that place of awe?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And it's interesting, though, as an apologist for Beyond, because he could sound dogmatic that you're searching for absolute truth. His daughter wrote that it's absolute truth, but it's not an absolute. It's always in the process of becoming.
Right.
And she said that it's an ongoing journey. And if you anchor yourself, you stop traveling.
If you what yourself?
If you anchor yourself. In other
Anchor
words,
yourself.
if you think you find truth, then you
Okay.
stop traveling. So you're
Right.
always on this journey. It's like an
Yeah.
ideal, but it's a quest.
Yeah. Yeah. That really permeates the kind of psychology, psychotherapy that I'm drawn to and interested in, is that rather than rigid fixed ideas.
Yeah.
So I love the openness with which you approach it. Do you actually, in your sessions, do you close your eyes with your client? Do you both kind of meditate a little first or not? Or is it more just kind of internal for you?
I only do that. I have started doing some meditation with patients who really need it. And of course, we do it then. And I also, my eyes are 3/4 closed during the dream work that I do.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So in
Well,
both
here.
of those cases, but otherwise, I try to bring the client into a meditative state without it being explicit.
Right. Right. And one of the really interesting chapters in your book relates to the uncanny. And I hope everybody out there knows what uncanny means. I'm not sure how to define it. Can you define what's meant by uncanny?
It's something eerie, strange, unfamiliar. Like, I think the German word Heimlich means, homey or familiar, and unheimlich is strange or distant. And I
Uh-huh.
think that's what Freud meant when he wrote about the uncanny. But I think there is a whole I kind of wanted to go into in the book in things that we don't usually go into, because I didn't want to write a book that everyone already knows about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Good.
so this is a kind of a little bit of a departure from, I would say, traditional ideas, but there is all kinds of communication that goes on between patient and therapist, as between partners in a marriage relationship,
Right.
as between mother and child or good friends.
Yeah.
It's not just limited, of course, to therapy, but I'm just going to focus on that. And I've gotten all kinds of communications from patients that I do not understand, but
In the
they
sense,
come.
and yeah, in the sense that they almost seem magical, as in
Well, it seems
mind
like, so
reading or
yeah,
ESP, something like that.
it is, it seems like ESP, and whether or
Yeah.
not someday we will know the neurological basis for this, we may, just like we now know about mirror neurons. That doesn't explain everything, but it explains some of how we understand other people and we
Yeah.
understand their intentions.
Yeah.
And someday there may be a complete explanation, but right now it happens. And there are all kinds of experiments that I do go into in the book a little bit. I couldn't enumerate them all because that's a whole book in itself,
Sure. Sure.
um, but there are many experiments that show how there is this communication going
Yeah,
on.
I was fortunate enough to teach in a psychology department that was in California and
Hmm.
and even radically open for California. So I actually taught a course on parapsychology
Oh,
years and years
nice.
ago, and
Mm.
certainly uh, one of the findings way back then, and maybe it's even more strongly uh, uh, more evidence now, but strong emotional relationships tend to
Hmm.
give birth to that sort of experience. So uh, you mentioned mothers and children's
Oh, yeah.
spouses. Uh, there are times in my life where it seems like my wife was reading my mind, or I was reading her mind, or we say the same thing at the same time. But
Right.
also, I remember when I was in new relationships with women, there were a couple of instances where we
Hmm.
hadn't even exchanged that much information objectively, like the
Yes,
living together, anything like that. And boom, she says something that's in my mind or that I was
exactly.
thinking of asking her about. The couple of incidents that I was on the edge of asking, something of, and
Yeah.
you just started speaking right to that.
Yeah.
So
I know.
yeah, so
And these are very interesting things to explore. And sometimes you can use them in sessions, and sometimes I have, and I've been a little apprehensive sometimes because it seems like you're coming from out from left field, but sometimes it really registers with the patient and they
yeah,
go with it,
yeah.
and it can
So
break through.
so somehow you have to learn to trust yourself, right? In terms of
Yeah, that's a big
taking
thing.
that risk.
That's a big thing. And what I do is what I have done to train my imagination and my intuition is I let everything register on me in the first session and even the first phone call. And I make all these hypotheses about the patient.
Hmm.
I do not reveal them to the patient, my ideas,
Right.
because they could be wrong. And then
Yeah.
I train myself to know which was correct and which wasn't
Uh-huh.
as this therapy goes on.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
I get a lot of
Fascinating.
information right away about unconsciously from the
Y-
patient.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I just think that's such a dynamic and fascinating area to look at that interface and to bring it into
Hmm.
therapy. Now, I'm particularly interested, as I mentioned earlier, in your work on dreams, and and I know that you studied with Robert Bosnak, who I
Yeah.
have had the privilege of interviewing once or twice,
Hmm.
and his approach called embodied dream imagination. And you took
Hmm.
an extensive kind of tutorial with him over several years, right?
Right. Yes. In LA. Yeah.
Okay. And of course, one of the fascinating things for me is that uh, Robert Bosnak is a Jungian analyst,
Hmm.
and you went into psychoanalysis. When the way you're talking and your interest and all, you sound like a Jungian. And how is it that you went into psychoanalysis instead of becoming a Jungian analyst?
Well, I think in my heart I am a Jungian, but I was trained in New York City and postdoctoral in New York City and practice in New York City. And really, Jung is not popular at all. I mean, in my
So
circles,
yeah,
uh,
so that was before you really had grokked Jung, got into
no,
Jung.
I think before I went into training, I was very interested in Jung, and I
Oh,
remember
okay.
doing a paper in graduate school on Jung, but there was so little interest in it that I got influenced by so many other things.
Sure.
And then when I heard Robbie's speak at New York, I just was very drawn to it, and so I decided to embark on this certification program, 3-year certification
Mm-hmm.
program.
Wow.
But I have not been trained as a Jungian analyst. I was trained very much in um, many other traditions,
Yeah.
Freudian, interpersonal, relational. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, you
I
got a
think,
good mix.
yeah, I do. I do.
Yeah. So tell us about embodied imagination, and maybe you can give us some examples of dreams as we go along, either your own or somebody else's, in which you can
Yeah.
concretely give us a sense of what one does when they're using embodied imagination.
Well, the wonderful thing about it is that it really facilitates creativity and the creation of new patterns. And this is what
Okay.
we want in therapy.
Yeah.
And it's a way of getting right to the body and working with the body with images to help you create something new. And so, um, you know, what you do is, shall I just give you a little really brief synopsis of what you
Oh,
do?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't even
What
have to be that brief.
Okay. Well, you bring the patient, or we don't even call him a patient because it can be done with anyone. This is
Okay.
done with scientists, with artists, with creative writers, with people in the high tech industry. It can be because everyone is trying to solve some kind of creative problem.
Hmm.
Uh, so um, so you bring the person into a meditative state, like you bring them into a relaxation technique and a body scan first. So the person is very relaxed, and so are you. And that's nice because they like it that you're doing it too.
Yes.
Especially my patients who are not used to me, doing it with them in that way. So they
Yeah.
like that. And then they tell the dream, and then a couple of times, and then the dream worker is listening and chooses uh, a, like a way to approach the dream, a strategy. So you pick, say, for argument's sake, 3 images, but it can be from 2 to 5. Say you pick 3 images in the dream that you feel one should represent the habitual self of the person, the way they usually see the world. Say they see themselves as a downtrodden victim a lot.
Uh-huh.
So that would be one image. But say they have another image in the dream of a horse that's flying and is very, wonderful, transcendent. You
Yeah.
might pick that. And then you might pick another one that where, something positive is happening. So you try to marry the more the what he calls alien intelligences. something that's not typical, like you're not usually feeling like a transcendent horse because you're always feeling like everybody's attacking you. So you try to learn from these images, and you put these images together into a composite, and you feel the images in your body while you're working on it. You feel them like where in the body of the horse does he feel that happy? Where does he feel like he can soar over the earth like that?
Yeah.
And then you'll say, well, maybe in his hind legs.
Huh.
And so you anchor it. Okay, the horse with its hind legs feels like it can just, fly over the whole world. And it's a very involved process, but I'm trying to speed it up because it would take me, an hour at least to explain it. But the
Okay.
point is that you help the dreamer go into the images, feel those images in their body. And this is the hard part. You have to get them to transit into the horse. They have to feel themselves to be the horse.
Mm-hmm.
They have to imitate the motions of the horse, imitate the flying, imitate the soaring, imitate the motion of the back legs until they really feel into the horse.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hearing connections to other approaches that, like Fritz Perls Gestalt therapy, where it's definitely had similarities there.
Yeah. Okay. But then you take these 3 images and you put them into a composite and you practice them. So you're over and over again, hopefully 20 minutes a day for as long as you feel it has juice.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of mingles the usual victim stance with the more courageous stance. And something new happens if you keep practicing.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you compare this to Freudian dream interpretation? Because I assume that's something that you maybe started with.
Yeah. And I love that too.
Okay.
I've always loved working with dreams,
Yeah.
And, it's very easy for me to do that. Bosniak would say that, when you make dream interpretations, how do you really know what you're right? I mean, he doesn't like it. His work has no interpretation. So you can imagine it was very hard for me at first.
Yeah.
His work has no interpretation. His work just stays with the image.
Right.
And the
I've
images mingle and they create something new.
So they have a life of their own, and this may
Yes.
evolve during the course of doing that internal work. Yeah.
Yeah. And then something happens that's called an emergent phenomenon. Something comes out of that.
Yeah.
And dream, more traditional Freudian interpretation, you get the patient's associations, you put them together, you come up with an interpretation that makes sense in terms of what you've heard in the associations and what you know about the patient. And, I think that's very valid too. I'm not saying it's not valid, but this is just an interesting approach. And in terms of creativity facilitation, I know from personal experience how good it is, because that's really why I almost went, is because I really wanted to get more creative.
Mm-hmm. And I see what looks like a painting behind you there. Is that of your own creation?
No, this is my good friend Efrat Ganat, who is also a psychologist, psychoanalyst, who does what I advocate. She married the field of neuroscience and cognitive neuropsychology with psychoanalysis and wrote a book a few years ago called The Neuropsychology of the Unconscious. It's an example of what I'm trying to advocate of interdisciplinary exploration.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, this little mask here is done by an artist in Mexico who helped me with my second play, which was about Alice in Wonderland. And
That's right. You're a
yeah,
playwright. That's in your bio. I forgot about that.
yeah. Well, that is a result of, well, I always wanted to do more creative writing. And when I was 10 years old, no, maybe 12, I wrote a musical comedy with my friend. and since then, nothing. So I started writing plays in the middle of my work with Robbie.
Uh-huh. Wow. So
And they've all been produced and everything.
really? Wow.
Yeah.
So do you have a dream of your own that you could share here, the highlights of it? Sometimes people have really complicated dreams.
No, I have one that I think is emblematic, and it was the first dream I had in the course that I took with him.
Yeah.
And you see my whole dilemma.
Okay.
You can easily interpret it, but you don't have to.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he didn't interpret it, but I always interpret them anyway. But in this dream, I'm at a kind of outdoor tables, and it's kind of messy, the table, and a colleague of mine is there, and his wife didn't come, and we're all going somewhere else. And he says, "No, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to wait for her." And then we go somewhere else. And then suddenly I'm in a playroom with kids, and this woman is sitting there, and she has these dreads. You know what I mean by dreads? Yeah. Dreadlocks.
Yeah.
But they're like Crayola colors. They're like incredibly primary color Crayolas colors. And I'm like, what is this? And then her husband says, "I need you to do me a favor. You have to do something for me." And he tells me to do something, and I have to go somewhere and get something from him. But then I forgot my keys, so I had to go home first. And I'm tired, and I feel bedraggled and exhausted, and it's getting dark, and I'm resentful. So those are the three images.
Okay, so the three images are the messy table.
Well, it's more the man who feels he can break the frame and not come with us. He can decide to wait. That's what impressed me.
Okay.
And then the second one is these dreadlocks.
Yes.
And the third is this exhausted woman.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And so I put those three together. And when I was in the dreadlocks, I started laughing. It was like very playful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that. And I felt that working that composite was very helpful to me, because I felt like in reality, I felt very overworked and very exhausted, and too much work, too much clinical work, not enough time. And I wanted those dreadlocks, but I didn't, they were very foreign to me. Like I found it very hard to get into the dreadlocks. And then the first person, I just admired him because he can decide. He has agency. He can decide, I'm not going to go. I'm going to wait. I don't care that you're all going. So it was that kind of agency. So the agency mixed with the playfulness, mixed with the exhausted self, creates a new thing.
Yeah. A synthesis.
So the tired self gets transformed somewhat by the other two images.
Yeah. So how did that turn into a play? What's the storyline of the play?
Oh, well, I can tell you the play that I started to write, it's not so much that it comes straight from the dream. It's just that the dream gave me the courage to open up to write the play.
Uh-huh.
But the play, which I think is interesting, it's called The Meeting of My Dreams. And it's 5 matriarchs from my family, slightly disguised, that get together. So it was my great grandmother, grandmother, mother, me, and my daughter.
Wow.
And of course, the first 3 are dead, but they came together.
Yeah.
And we told each other our dreams, and there was more understanding and some forgiveness for what I saw as an intergenerational trauma that went down through 5 generations.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I think trauma is one of the things that you discuss in the book as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because trauma constricts the imagination. So, it makes you more rigid. Lots of times when patients become very rigid, I know that they're some kind of trauma has been triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the enemy of creativity, the rigidity. So there are ways to work with this. And I think the arts is a wonderful way. And by the way, that was another purpose of my plays, because every play I wrote was about trauma. And so what I would love to do is to have audiences of patients and therapists watch these plays. And with the aesthetic distance, you can acknowledge some of your own trauma. It's less overwhelming if you see it up on
Definitely.
stage.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, and I have had the opportunity to have the plays presented both to clinicians and to patients. And then we always have a talk back at the end where we discuss the play. And people have said amazing things in the talk back. I mean, it's like group therapy.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It sounds like group therapy.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful breakthrough for you in your life to open up your creativity in that channel,
Yeah, it is. It was.
Yeah,
Even the
it
courage
was, it is.
Even the courage to write this book is along the same lines.
Yeah. Since there's so much of your work has been around trauma, or at least the dramatic work,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like you are dealing with some inner trauma in your life? Was there anything that you ever identified as traumatic?
Well, yeah, there have been various traumas. And in fact, this play, my mother was the recipient of some of this trauma that I talked about in this intergenerational, and then she transmitted it to me.
Uh-huh.
And I feel that I have had trauma, not certainly as great as many people, but enough so there was a lot of struggle, and I've had many years of psychoanalysis too to help with that.
Yeah.
So
some of my guests have claimed that everybody has trauma.
I do feel that also, because
that,
you listen to anybody's story.
Right.
There's trauma.
There's always something there.
Yes. And some much worse than others, but yes.
Sure.
There's always trauma. And maybe I feel at this point in my life, I can give back some, to others through the plays and through the books. And because I know what it's like, but I found some peace now. So.
Yeah. Yeah. How's it going for you during, right now we're all living in trauma, right?
Yeah. I think that's another value of the book, is that it might give you ideas how to keep your creativity alive in this isolated space we live in.
Yeah.
But,
one of the things you said is you got a chapter on how art heals.
Yeah.
Which is, another way of saying that creativity or imagination can have a healing potential.
Yes. Yeah.
So how are you coping with all the traumatic stuff that's happening with us, the
Yeah.
degradation of the environment, the political
Yeah.
rift,
Yeah.
there's plenty.
Oh yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot. Yeah. I'm aware. I'm very heartened by what just happened, the
As am I.
election.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I think, and then just today, there was big news about the vaccine, that there may be a vaccine that's 90% effective.
Oh,
It's
really?
still, it's still
I
early.
haven't heard any news
In
today.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, those two things are helpful. But I have to say, personally, this has been an opportunity for creativity for me.
How
And I
so?
am,
How so?
well, I'm working with a wonderful colleague, Terry Marks Tarlow, who, by the way, also is an incredible writer. And she writes about clinical intuition and psychotherapy, and also integrates neurobiology and the body into psychoanalysis,
Yeah.
psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And but she and I are at work on this wild project, a graphic novel about trauma.
Oh, great.
And she's
Yeah.
an artist,
Uh-huh.
and I'm writing the script, and she's
Uh-huh.
doing the art. Just like when I was in 8th grade, I wrote the lyrics and my friend wrote the music.
Uh-huh.
And so we've been working on this like nonstop,
Wow.
and
Do you
we're
do it over
excited.
over Zoom, or do you get together in
Over
person?
Zoom.
Over Zoom.
Well, she's in LA, so yeah.
Uh-huh. That's great. That's inspiring. The idea of people using the space of time that we have
Yeah,
to
because we have more time.
to
I
work
mean,
creatively,
there's
like
so
that.
much we're not doing. We're not
Yeah.
going to the theater. We're not going to movies. We're not going out for walks much. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we sort of close down, I wanted to have you read a portion from your book so people get a sense of your
Sure.
writing.
Okay, this is one of my favorite pieces from the
Okay.
book, and it shows it's another aspect of the creative process. How, yes, we work on the process, but then the process takes a life of its own. And that's another mystical idea. Just like my book took a life of its own after
Uh-huh.
a while,
Yeah,
you know?
really. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this. Oh, and another thing is that I love Bible stories, for their metaphoric value.
Hmm.
That's another thing. People in my profession, a lot of them are very anti-Bible, and anti-religion. Not everybody, of course, but there's a group. But I enjoy the Bible stories for their mythological value and what they can
Yes.
teach us, what we
Yes.
can learn from them. And this is from the book of Jeremiah.
Okay.
This is what it's based on.
Okay.
And it's called The Potter and His Clay. The clinician guides the way, yet the patient has control as well. This is similar to the interactions between the artist and his material, and in the biblical scholar Zornberg's reflection between God and man. As is described in the book of Jeremiah, while the potter makes the clay pot and in some sense has control, the pot also tells the potter what it wants to be. Zornberg writes that even God sacrifices some of his sovereignty when he makes man in his image. God is willing to contract to create space for the world because he desires to be known by man. However, now man has free will and may not always do God's bidding. Adam too sacrifices some of his power when Eve is created. Yet Adam desires a partner, as without one, life might be static and unchanging. Adam and Eve get to live face to face with each other, uniting and separating according to their will. They have the benefit of loving involvement, but the risk of vulnerability. Both patient and therapist give up aspects of their freedom. While the patient may feel understood and validated, and in that sense, quote, free, he is also required to be vulnerable, accept challenge, and even more difficult, attempt change. He is face to face with a therapist, intertwined in union and separateness. There are risks and freedom for the therapist as well. She is free to make observations and interpretations, yet is also humbled by the expressions and proclivities of the patient. Patient and therapist dance together, with the therapist leading, but always cognizant if she and the patient are in step.
That's very nice. Yeah, really captures that aspect of creativity where it comes alive and it takes its own direction. We had spoken on the phone to prepare for this a few days ago, and I shared with you that I had started writing poetry just very recently, and had the experience of starting out a poem thinking it was about one thing, but then suddenly seeing that, oh, wait a second, there's a twist here where it could become more universal, not just my story, but part of a bigger story. And also, I used to, when I was teaching, I taught a dreams class, and one of the aspects of the class was everybody had to do a creative project, hopefully based on their dreams. And so, like you, I felt that if I was going to ask somebody to do something, I should be doing it myself. So, and I did not think of myself. I tell other people you're an artist and so on, but it's harder to fully embody that sometimes, so I have real doubts about that for myself. And but I would be delighted, pushing past that because I had to, because I'm teaching this class and I better come up with something. And then I would end up feeling just delighted by the thing that I had made.
Right. Because yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
Well, that's part of the creative process, to be insecure and uncertain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's right at the heart of it, isn't it? I mean, if we're just doing the stuff we already know about and are totally comfortable with, then.
Right. But also, there's an interesting neurobiological aspect of this. Supposedly, the same parts of the brain that get activated in trauma also get activated when we try to become creative. So lots of times when people try to attempt a creative project, they could become very anxious because the trauma is being resurrected. So they may need help with that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as we wind down here, that was a great close, but is there anything else that you were hoping to say or that you want to say? Yeah. Or let me ask you, who do you want to read this book? Who did you write this book for?
Well, I really wrote it for everybody, even though it's aimed at clinicians, and it's my attempt to give them the courage to expand their creativity and then pass that on to their clients. I also think that anybody could read it and expand their creativity and find ways to approach their life in a more expansive and joyful way.
Yeah, I think that's a great close for us. So, Leanne Domash, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyable.